This is a massive site in the Arizona desert. And right now, there are roughly 4,000 military aircraft sitting here, worth billions of dollars in total, but for some reason there isn't a single airport anywhere nearby. It's basically a giant graveyard for military aircraft. And the whole scene feels almost surreal. Huge bombers, supersonic fighter jets, and heavy attack aircraft are lined up here, many of them still in surprisingly good technical condition. In theory, you could put together an incredibly powerful air fleet from these planes, but instead, they just sit here, looking completely abandoned and useless. What's even stranger is that the United States keeps them here and doesn't even seem interested in selling them or putting them back in the air. So why is that? Let's find out. Let's clear this up right away. Why Arizona? Why not the lush green lawns of Florida or some massive hangars in Texas? The truth is, the spot near Tucson chosen for this gigantic aircraft storage facility wasn't picked at random. It was selected with almost obsessive precision. Nature had created such a perfect combination of conditions here that the place was basically impossible to pass up. This stretch of desert sits almost 2,600 feet above sea level. The air is thin, and the humidity is a ridiculously low 20 to 30%. Why does that matter? Simple. For rust to attack metal, nature needs a conductor, which is moisture. Less moisture means corrosion slows way down. In conditions like these, aircraft-grade aluminum and extremely expensive titanium can sit under the blazing sun for half a century. But dry air is only half the trick. The real interesting part begins when you look down. In most places on Earth, soil is fairly acidic. Bury a piece of metal in it, and over time, the ground will literally eat it away. But in Arizona, the soil is highly alkaline. In simple terms, it acts like a natural preservative. Landing gear struts and wheels that come in contact with the ground get a basic layer of protection from underground corrosion. Okay, but where do you even put 4,000 giant machines? Especially when some of them weigh close to 200 tons. Roll something like that onto ordinary desert sand and it'll sink straight in up to its wings. Regular soil wouldn't do much better. Pouring a real reinforced concrete slab over almost 4 square miles would be economic madness. You could go broke before you even finished buying the cement. After all, we're talking about an area the size of an entire town. And that's where nature handed the people behind this facility one more trump card. Right beneath a thin layer of dust lies a geological layer called caliche. Right beneath a thin layer of dust lies a geological layer called caliche. Essentially, it's a crust of calcium carbonate compressed over thousands of years. In other words, natural concrete. This stuff is so hard and solid that huge aircraft can be parked directly on the raw ground. The earth holds them firmly in place. No sinking, no cracked asphalt, and most importantly, not a single extra cent spent on construction crews. Nature had already done the most expensive part of the job completely free of charge. But you don't really think they flew all these winged giants out here and simply abandoned them to the elements, do you? As if solid ground and sunshine were enough and the planes could just sit there forever? Not even close. Every aircraft that arrives is sent straight into a rigorous preservation process. First, all fuel, lubricants, and hydraulic fluids are completely drained. They can't be left inside because over time they turn into a corrosive sludge and start eating away at the tanks. Instead, the entire fuel system is thoroughly flushed with a special lightweight preservation oil. It settles as a thin film along the inner walls of the lines, protecting them from corrosion from the inside. Then comes the most mesmerizing part of the whole process. The aircraft is wrapped in a futuristic spacesuit. The storage facility uses a liquid vinyl coating called Spraylat. It's sprayed right onto the fuselage, and once exposed to the air, it hardens into a tough rubber-like shell. And this is where a clever bit of engineering comes in. The cocoon is applied in exactly 2 layers. First comes a dark base layer. Its job is to seal every seam, sensor, and air intake so that the ever-present desert dust and sand can't sneak inside. But if the aircraft were left black, the Arizona sun would turn it into an oven. The delicate equipment inside would basically melt. So a second layer goes on top. White. This outer coat works like a giant mirror. It reflects harsh ultraviolet rays and keeps the temperature inside the sealed cockpit within safe limits. The result is a perfect protective shell. The coolest part is that this vinyl can last for years, but when needed, it can be peeled off in just a few hours, like an old screen protector coming off a smartphone. Look out across the field and it feels as if an entire army of white ghosts is frozen in the middle of the desert. So, the aircraft have been treated and parked out on the desert storage lot. You'd think you can show up at night with a toolbox, casually unscrew some part, or stage a dramatic photo shoot out on the wing, but the reality is just trying to get anywhere near the fence around this site can land you in serious trouble fast. In fact, the perimeter here is protected better than many government banks. The entire massive site is surrounded by serious layers of security, complete with motion sensors. Modern thermal imaging systems and high-resolution cameras are installed throughout the area, monitoring every movement within a radius of several miles, 24/7 and in any weather. Try to get close and an interceptor vehicle with armed security will be dispatched immediately. On top of that, the airspace above the entire zone is completely off limits to outsiders. Consumer drones are automatically jammed here, so capturing dramatic aerial footage without official permission is impossible no matter how hard you try. But physical security is only the tip of the iceberg. The real technological marvel lies in how this place is managed. A site the size of a small city operates as one perfectly synchronized digital machine. Forget the chaos and decay you usually associate with car junkyards. Here, everything is kept in absolute, almost sterile order. Every massive vehicle that arrives, every component removed from it, an engine part, a wheel, a circuit board, or even the tiniest electronic module is instantly registered in a global digital database. To make this possible, the creators of the facility use a strict barcode tracking system. With just one click, engineers can instantly identify the precise location of any required part, down to the section, row, and cocoon, as well as its current technical condition. The system tracks millions of stored items across an area of roughly 4 square miles. It turns a wild desert landscape into an efficient logistics warehouse. And when you see this level of control, it becomes clear that this is not a scrapyard at all. This vast stretch of land is a heavily guarded Pentagon military facility. Officially, it's called the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group, but around the world it's known simply as AMARG. And despite what it may look like, there's no chaos here. Everything follows strict military order. The moment another multi-ton aircraft touches down on the runway, its future is immediately assigned to one of several clearly defined storage categories. The most exclusive group is known as Type 1000. This is the untouchable strategic reserve. Aircraft in this category are carefully preserved and maintained by engineers. Removing instruments, components, or even the tiniest screw from them is strictly forbidden. So why are they protected so carefully? Because if a major geopolitical conflict breaks out, these aircraft are expected to return to service as quickly as possible. They must be capable of taking to the skies within just a few weeks of receiving the order. In other words, they're not dead, they're simply sleeping, kept in full combat-ready condition. A step below that is Type 3000. Think of it as a waiting room. This is where aircraft are sent when their future's still undecided. They may be waiting for a major upgrade, a transfer to another unit, or simply standing by until a new mission is found for them. Since their stay here is temporary, they're also kept intact. And at the very bottom of the list is Type 4000. These are the official retirees. This equipment has been fully written off and it'll never return to the skies again. Its final fate is either to become a museum exhibit or to be sent off for scrapping. But wait a second. Imagine how much money it takes to maintain this entire metal empire. Surely this must be a massive drain on the budget, and that's where the real paradox begins. The United States doesn't just avoid wasting money here, it actually manages to generate enormous value from this facility. And the key to this hidden source of revenue lies in a separate, highly sought-after category of aircraft. Meet the most profitable category on the entire base, Type 2000. These aircraft have officially been reclassified as parts donors. In fact, AMARG operates like a massive, highly advanced supermarket, or if you prefer, a legal aircraft salvage yard, but exclusively for the needs of the active fleet. Instead of buying brand new components from defense contractors at astronomical prices every time something breaks, the Department of Defense simply sends an official request to Arizona. The scale of this operation is impressive. Every year, engineers and mechanics carefully remove more than 40,000 hard-to-find parts from preserved airframes. Those components are thoroughly tested, packed, and quickly shipped to repair facilities around the world. The inventory is enormous, everything from massive jet engines, landing gear struts, and wing components to highly complex avionics and obsolete microchips. By the way, old electronics are a whole headache of their own. Many military aircraft remain in service for 40 or even 50 years. The factories that once produced their navigation boards or processors have long since shut down or moved on to other products. Ordering a single, one-of-a-kind microchip from scratch at a modern facility would be a financial nightmare and could take months. In Arizona, that same unit can simply be removed from a similar aircraft, tested on diagnostic equipment, and sent straight to the forces that need it. The economics of the process have been calculated down to the last cent. According to official defense reports, every dollar spent on maintaining AMARG, its infrastructure, and its personnel generates $11 in savings. Thanks to this empire of donor aircraft, the budget saves more than $500 million every year. Old equipment doesn't just sit there rotting away, it directly extends the service life of aircraft that are still flying, working as a perfect example of lean manufacturing. And that raises an obvious question. If these aircraft are so valuable, and if many of them are still in excellent condition, why doesn't the government simply put all this surplus equipment up for international auction as complete aircraft? Just imagine how many billions could be made by selling ready-to-fly planes to private airlines or foreign allies that desperately need them. But in real life, this elegant idea immediately runs into a legal wall called ITAR, the U.S. International Traffic in Arms Regulations. Under this strict body of law, a fighter jet's not just a vehicle, it's a carrier of critical state technology. Hidden inside each aircraft are classified radars, friend or foe identification systems, encrypted communications equipment, and targeting complexes. Selling all of that to some private company or putting it up for public auction is strictly forbidden. Anyone who tried to arrange such a deal would very quickly find themselves heading to federal prison on charges tied to espionage and treason. Alright, so private buyers are off the table, but what about official foreign allies? That's where geopolitics enters the picture. If the United States suddenly decided to dump a few hundred used but still combat-capable fighters or attack aircraft onto the international market at a good price, it could instantly upset the fragile balance of power around the world. A long-running local conflict somewhere in Asia or the Middle East could flare up with new force simply because one side had suddenly gained air superiority. That's why the U.S. State Department blocks these kinds of international deals before they even get past the draft stage to avoid throwing more fuel on a fire right next door. So you might ask, why not just strip the aircraft down, remove the guns, radars, classified modules, and sell a clean, bare airframe? It sounds simple, but in reality, full demilitarization is a technical nightmare. To officially remove a military vehicle's classification as a weapon, it has to be stripped down almost to the frame. The wiring must be completely replaced, all missile suspension mounts cut off, and the armor components destroyed. By the time all that painstaking work is done, along with the mountain of paperwork required by regulators, the process becomes extremely expensive for the government. And the final buyer simply won't want to pay that kind of money for an old, heavily modified aircraft. So the whole thing turns into a dead end. Selling to private companies is a criminal case waiting to happen, handing them over to allies creates geopolitical risks, and converting them for civilian use makes no economic sense. With all that in mind, it's much easier, safer, and cheaper to seal the aircraft in a protective cocoon and leave them in the desert. But as history shows, even in a place that isolated, some of these machines still end up coming face to face with the harsh realities of international diplomacy. During the Cold War, when arms reduction treaties were being signed, a peaceful storage site in Arizona suddenly became an execution ground for winged giants. Huge, deadly B-52 strategic bombers were rolled out onto a wide, flat concrete pad. Then a massive steel blade, a kind of guillotine weighing about 6 tons, was dropped onto them from above. With a horrible metallic screech, it sliced off their enormous wings and cut through their tails. But the most fascinating part was what happened next. Under the strict terms of the treaty, the broken fuselages could not be removed. They had to remain out in the open for exactly 90 days. Why? So Soviet spy satellites could pass over Arizona, take clear photographs, and visually confirm the physical destruction of America's nuclear-capable bombers. No tricks. It wasn't done out of cruelty, it was done for the sake of transparency in international relations. Every wing, every severed fuselage was carefully documented. Only after satellites had photographed the wreckage and confirmed the destruction could the remains finally be hauled away and melted down. Those were paranoid times when trust had to be built on ironclad proof visible even from space. But the story of disposal is only one side of the coin. While some aircraft were being systematically cut to pieces, others were being given a genuine second life. And this usually happened at moments when the active fleet suddenly found itself running out of planes to fly. The thing is, under U.S. law and international treaties, America's under a strict cap on how many B-52H strategic bombers it can have deployed at a given time. And aircraft like these haven't rolled off the production line in decades. So when one of the active airframes accidentally burns during maintenance or crashes, replacing it with a brand new aircraft of the same type simply isn't an option. The choice is either to accept a gap in the force or send engineers out to Arizona to go look for a replacement. That's exactly how the story of a B-52 with the fitting nickname Ghost Rider began in 2015. This bomber had spent 7 years sitting safely in the desert, stored in the strictest category of strategic reserve. When an accident created an opening in the operational fleet, technicians arrived at AMARG, carefully peeled away the aircraft's protective vinyl cocoon, replaced the fuel hoses, rewired key systems, and calmly brought the engines back to life. The aircraft made it to the repair plant, went through a complete upgrade, and was put back on full combat alert. 4 years later, the same incredibly complicated trick was repeated with another airframe called Wise Guy. This giant had spent even longer in the desert, a full 10 years. A team of engineers spent about 4 months bringing it back to life right there in the middle of the American sands, but the result was the same. The aircraft successfully took to the skies again. These two remarkable cases proved that the local climate and the two-layer protective wrapping weren't just a nice-looking detail for reports, they were a genuinely effective preservation technology, one capable of freezing time for some of the most complex machines ever built. Of course, happy endings in stories like these are few and far between. Not every aircraft gets the chance to become a frontline combat asset again. More often, these retirees face a very different and much sadder fate. They do return to the skies, but only after being turned into high-tech unmanned drones, destined to die spectacularly over a test range. For example, dozens of retired F-16 fighter jets that are still perfectly capable of flying aren't stripped for parts. Instead, they're sent to test ranges under a unique program called Full-Scale Aerial Targets. In simple terms, they're turned into full-size combat drones known as QF-16s. The entire cockpit's reworked with computers and servos installed so the aircraft can fly on its own. These old jets are then flown remotely, with no pilot on board, into a closed-off test area. There, cutting-edge American missiles launched from modern aircraft catch up with the drone fighter and ruthlessly tear it apart in the closest thing possible to real, high-intensity air combat at supersonic speeds. The old machine goes out in a spectacular fireball so engineers can see how the weapons of the future actually perform. Feel sorry for the bird? Absolutely. But the Pentagon didn't always take such a cold, cynical, and ruthlessly practical approach to outdated equipment because at one point, haste and stupidity cost them dearly. To understand why Americans are so meticulous about aircraft storage today, you have to look back at the bitter lesson of Kingman Airfield, also in Arizona. Right after World War II ended in 1945, U.S. authorities decided to get rid of a massive fleet of 5,500 military aircraft as quickly as possible. Government officials labeled the planes obsolete. They were rounded up in one place and, within just a couple of years, were mercilessly crushed and scrapped, with millions of short tons of perfectly good aluminum melted down into pots and pans. Everyone thought it was a great idea, until the bloody Korean War suddenly broke out. At that point, the top brass just threw their hands up in despair. They were desperately short of reliable, battle-tested attack aircraft to support troops on the ground, and those planes had all been cut up for scrap. So the U.S. had to spend enormous amounts of money building a new, smarter, long-term storage system almost from scratch. And that's how the Arizona facility eventually became an efficient aircraft storage hub, not just for American planes either. In 2011, facing brutal budget cuts, the UK decided to retire its famous fleet of Harrier vertical takeoff attack jets altogether. They were excellent aircraft, they'd simply become too expensive to keep. And guess what happened next? The U.S. Marine Corps, which operated the very same type of aircraft, jumped at the chance. Without thinking twice, they bought the entire British fleet, all 72 jets, in one bulk deal for a laughable $180 million, then shipped them straight to Arizona. The Americans had no intention of flying them. Their only goal was to use those nearly fresh British airframes as spare parts donors to keep their own AV-8B Harriers combat-ready well into the 2030s. In other words, they gutted British hardware to keep their own fleet alive. But this seemingly perfect, cost-effective scheme comes with one huge catch. Sooner or later, the era of simple aluminum aircraft will come to an end. And when it comes to preserving next-generation aircraft, the old approach of leaving them out on open tarmacs under the blazing sun suddenly stops working. We're talking about stealth technology. Famous, invisible aircraft such as the F-117 Nighthawk attack jet or fifth-generation fighters are built very differently from good old-fashioned duralumin aircraft. They have a distinctive shape and plenty of other tricks, but one of the most important features is a special radar-absorbent composite coating that helps hide them from radar. And in an ordinary desert environment, that layer becomes a real nightmare. The problem is these advanced machines are extremely finicky. Under the harsh glare of direct desert sun, the coating can begin to break down quickly and lose its effectiveness. Worse still, as the specialized stealth materials age and degrade, they can release toxic substances, which means leaving them exposed in the open isn't exactly safe. That's why stealth aircraft required an entirely different enclosed storage system. For example, when the United States officially retired the legendary F-117s, they were not sent to the main AMARG storage facility in Arizona. Instead, they were tucked away at the heavily guarded Tonopah test range in Nevada. Those angular black vehicles aren't kept outside on bare ground under vinyl sheeting. They're stored inside special climate-controlled hangars. Computers maintain strict humidity levels and a fixed temperature around the clock so that the delicate stealth coating doesn't peel away from the fuselage. Naturally, this costs a fortune and completely defeats the whole idea of a cheap desert storage yard, but that's the price of stealth technology. Invisibility comes with expensive upkeep. But climate-controlled hangars for stealth jets are just one of the changes the crews at these desert bases have to deal with. Their greatest challenge is still to come. Military aviation is now going through a major transformation. The era of manned cockpits is slowly being replaced by unmanned systems, and that's reshaping the world's most famous aircraft graveyard. In the past, the aircraft brought to Arizona were almost always conventional machines, with a pilot seat, a cockpit canopy, and a control yoke. But today, the parking areas at AMARG are increasingly filled with strange silhouettes that don't have a single window. The first generations of retired military drones have begun arriving here in neat rows. For example, the U.S. Air Force has already fully retired its famous MQ-1 Predator attack drones, which had been in active use since the late 1990s. They were soon followed into the desert by the early versions of the massive RQ-4 Global Hawk strategic reconnaissance drones. These huge unmanned aircraft with wingspans comparable to those of passenger jets have reached the end of their service lives and now sit on the ground alongside aging attack aircraft. So why are they preserved here? For the same reasons as everything else. First, they make excellent sources of spare parts for more modern drones. Second, they're stored as a strategic reserve for major conflicts where simpler, cheaper unmanned aircraft could still prove useful for reconnaissance or for distracting enemy air defenses. In a couple of decades, the face of this base may change beyond recognition. The familiar manned aircraft will gradually be replaced by thousands of autonomous systems and loyal wingman drones that are only just beginning to enter production today. They'll be sealed inside the same airtight vinyl cocoons, only instead of a human pilot who needs time to train, these machines of the future will need little more than a fresh software upload and a signal from a remote operator to return to the sky. In the end, the thousands of aircraft sitting under the blazing Arizona sun are not a monument to human wastefulness, and they're certainly not an ordinary scrapyard full of old metal. What we're looking at is a massive, tightly controlled strategic reserve. Out here in the desert, valuable government assets are not simply thrown away, they're carefully placed into a kind of technological hibernation. On one hand, the facility functions like an advanced spare parts supermarket, saving the military budget hundreds of millions of dollars every year. On the other, it ensures that in a real crisis, a tremendous amount of firepower can be brought back into service on short notice. Here, nature and engineering have come together with one goal: to squeeze the maximum possible value out of every part. So as long as these white cocoons remain lined up across the rocky desert floor, they stand as an example of an exceptionally calculated, cold, and efficient economic strategy.